The State of the Union conference goes on and we keep discussing Europe in a changing world. And next on the conference agenda is a very exciting session where we're going to be discussing how we have gone from goods and services to data and how the world today is dominated by data as a commodity. How should policy and regulators respond to the challenges that are posed in this new environment? And the moderator of this session is Giacomo Calzolari, Professor of Economics at the European University Institute and Research Fellow at the Center for Economic Policy Research.
Thank you. Welcome everybody, and in particular, welcome to our guest speaker today, the Executive Vice President and Commissioner Margrethe Vestager. We are honored and thrilled to have our guest speaker with us today at the annual conference of the European University Institute, the State of the Union. We know that today we're going to talk about data. Data are a very important and essential element in our economies, in modern economies, and in modern societies as well. And in fact, they've been assimilated to a new type of oil. And for this reason, they've been attracting a lot of attention and appetites. And it is for this reason that we have somehow emphatically titled this session with our guest speaker, The Global Battle over Data. Now, let me say that we are particularly honored today because with their activities presently, and also in the previous commission, Margrethe Vestager has been, this is my personal view, but I'm sure that this is shared among many of us, probably one of the most influential and effective commissioner on competition policy in the history of the European Union. So let's go back to data. It's not only the new oil, it's more than that. Actually, I think it's much better than the new oil. Data can be used, reused again. We actually produce very large amounts, massive amount of data continuously by interaction between humans. This is personal data, but also with machines, non-personal data. And by the way, using data properly doesn't pollute the environment. So, this is the topic of our conversation today. We're going to try to see how using data in a responsible way, protecting European consumers and citizens, preserving their personal information, and at the same time giving the opportunity to European companies to use data, and by means of this, by using data, creating value. We're going to see how, with the words of our guest speaker, we can have Europe fit for the digital age. So let me set the scene of this conversation. We're going to pass the microphone virtually to Brussels in a few seconds, where in Brussels we will be helped with the interview by the journalist of Euronews, Mahon. And then we will come back to Florence, to the refectorium of the European University Institute, where three young researchers are going to directly ask questions to our guest speaker. These researchers are scholars in the digital world. They are members of the interdisciplinary research cluster on technology and the impact on society that we have at the Institute. So, without further ado, I pass the floor to Brussels. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Giacomo, and hello to everyone, and a very warm welcome. As Giacomo said there, my name is Méabh Mahon, and I'm a journalist for Euronews, and I'm delighted to be joining you today for this fascinating session and have the opportunity to sit down with, as you said there, Giacomo, probably one of the most powerful regulators of big tech on the planet. That's the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Margrethe Vestager, the Dane responsible for getting Europe fit for the digital age, for the European strategy on data, for Europe's approach to artificial intelligence, to the new Digital Services Act, digital taxation, and of course, strengthening EU competition rules. Margrethe Vestager, thank you so much for joining us here today. It's lovely to see you there.
It's really good to be with you. Really good to be with you. And you are right. This is really exciting. And I think, as Giacomo just said, this is so much better than oil. Because data is indeed a renewable resource. It can be created all the time, and it can be used and reused. So it's sort of very topical for times where renewables, circular economy is what we want to achieve.
Okay, well, let's get down to it. In the chat, of course, the focus of it is that global battle for data. So my first question is the European Union in the battle? Why? And where are you hoping that it will lead?
Oh, I can tell you that we are, because as we speak, data is being created everywhere. And since Europe is such an industrial continent, a continent where we now digitalizes everything, that be mobility, that be our electricity grids, it can be agriculture, it is our health systems. We harvest data all the time. And with that data, well, we can do better. We can innovate more. We can build stronger businesses. And of course, we can also use this data to fight climate change. So it's really important. And as you say, this is a global matter because we are also in a geopolitical context where we have both systemic rivalry, economic competition, but also the need for partnerships on this planet. So how we deal with data, how we enable it to flow once we trust it, but how we also retain it if it's our own personal data, well, that is what we have ahead of us, both for practical implementation, but also to get the legislation right.
Yeah, a long road ahead, and you've already started it, of course. And if you do look at the US and China, I mean, they are innovating very fast. China very aggressively, may I add. When will the EU catch up? I mean, because this talk of an EU single market of data, it looks fine. It looks very nice on paper, but it feels a little bit abstract.
Yeah, I think it's really important not to underestimate our Europe because it's still so that the highest number of patents, well, that actually comes from Europe. And also that we have a very vibrant startup innovation community. And I think it's important not to see Europe as lagging behind, starting this new big chapter of digitization where data really, really, really makes the difference because it's so much more than data coming from search or from shopping. This is data about how the real world actually functions. So the challenge ahead of us is to make sure that data is being pooled, shared, and used for the better. And here, of course, we need to do something in particular because so many small and medium-sized businesses should be part of that. And it is a bigger hurdle for a smaller businesses to get to the use both of their own data, but also of pooled data, rather than a big business who would have a different setup. So, of course, we need to do things specifically to match sort of the European economic context and make the most of it.
And what about the business community? I mean, would there be incentives put in place to encourage them to share data? Because they're pretty reluctant, as it seems.
Yes, they are. And I think one of the reasons why they are reluctant to share data is that it's, they're all the time being told that they're sitting on gold. They may not really use it, but if they're sitting on gold, then why share it? And I think there is a lack of legal clarity, but also contractual clarity. So we are working on something that we call data spaces. It's basically a metaphor for getting the contractual obligations right, so that I know if I'm a business owner, I put my data in this data space and I take out maybe some other data that I know that I can do that safely. And we do that in quite a number of areas. The most topical right now is, of course, the health data space, because we have seen under COVID how important it was to be able to analyze health data, to analyze molecules, to analyze the virus in itself. And that, of course, also entails data looking into how vaccines work. Of course, that is also a lot of data processing that goes into it. So building these data spaces could make businesses feeling much more confident that they could use data to develop their business and to develop their business models to rely much more on the digital economy.
And the Data Governance Act that you presented, the proposal that you presented last November, I mean, it's a bit of the first step, and it's been presented really as an alternative to how big tech handle and share data. Tell us more about your concerns and your experiences so far with big tech, how they're dealing with, and why you think it's important to do something about it.
Well, what you said is actually, I think, a very valuable point, to find a model where people are not obliged to share data, but if they want to do it, that they can do it in a way so that it's transparent what is happening. And one of the things in the Data Governance Act is sort of the template to set up intermediaries so that you have a neutral partner to receive data, but also to enable data to be used by others, and intermedia who would know that everything is fine. Because I think a lot of people worry about privacy rules or proprietary data and all of that. And that, of course, is a different and more dynamic model because it allows many more to participate in the data economy, where you see with some big tech, you see this giant accumulation of data that makes it very, very difficult for others to get a competitive edge, because the more data you have, well, the better you can, for instance, foresee what will be the demand patterns from customers. Unfortunately, we also see that some big tech, they use data in a way that is not really in accordance with competition rules. We have the preliminary conclusions of the Amazon case, that Amazon is enabling Amazon Retail access to data from all the many merchants on the Amazon marketplace, where the merchants themselves do not have access to the same level of really high quality data about the consumer behavior. That is for Amazon Retail, and that gives them an unprecedented benefit. So of course it's the legislation, the Governance Act, the Data Act to come later, but it's also vigilant competition law enforcement to make sure that the benefits of the data economy is actually widely spread.
You mentioned the Data Act that will come later. I might ask you about that in a couple of minutes. But first, I mean, we're talking here about big tech. I mean, companies like Facebook, Google, they've been gobbling up our data for the last couple of years, and they've been reaping the economic benefits. So is this Data Governance Act and the information that we're expecting to come out of the Commission a little bit later this year the way of perhaps catching up on them?
Well, it will produce a different model and a different way of governing data. And while this is ongoing, I also think that there is sort of an awakening about what it takes for us really to take care of our own data, both when they are personal data and when they are not personal data. As long as it's not misused, I think it's a really good thing when for instance, digital service providers ask people, would you accept that this app will keep tracking what you do on your phone also when you're not actively using this app? So that people are presented with easy choices as to how to not only have rights, but also enforce rights when it comes to ownership of the data already created, but also how to make sure that I know when data is being created about what I do and what I do not do online. And at the same time, to distinguish between personal data, which has its own governance, and more industrial data. Because when it comes to industrial data, we have a completely different set of possibilities, because we don't need to have the same concerns as when it is personal data. And in that, of course, we push forward as fast as we can.
And just briefly, have you had any reaction from big tech on your proposals?
Well, not so much. I think it's quite early days. In the beginning of every sort of deliberation in the European Parliament and Council, we usually get a quite positive approach. Then we tend to see later that there is some efforts to kind of make the proposals less intrusive, or in my eyes, less effectful when it comes to making the marketplace open and contestable. But that remains to be seen.
And one big topic, of course, is our values here in Europe and our rights, a big topic close to our hearts. And MEPs, of course, at the moment are scrutinising the Governance Act as well as we speak. And they're saying it should, of course, be based on privacy, on transparency and respect for fundamental rights. So how are you going to strike that balance?
Well, I don't think we should negotiate it online, but we share the fundamentals here, because the point of the European model is indeed that we will take sort of our speaking line from all our speeches and put them into everyday life, because otherwise the speeches, they are basically nullified. So the challenging thing here is to say, well, if we want to enable people to enforce their rights, and at the same time to enable our economy to get the best that data can produce, then we'll have to strike a balance and also to differentiate between different types of data. And I think that is I know, a very trivial point, but also very important, because not everything is personal data. And not every data that has been anonymized can be traced back to the original data owner. And I think we need that kind of nuance in the debate in order to enable a setup that will create the trust, not only for those of us who provide data, but also for the businesses who will actively use it, so that they can do that with legal certainty and go ahead with their innovative processes.
And you mentioned there how one thing can be a statement from the Commission and another thing is what's happening on the ground, which leads me nicely on to my next question, which is, what about the implementation of the Data Protection Act? I mean, it will, of course, be up to national data authorities, but assessments have shown that EU countries can't enforce the GDPR rules properly. So what's foreseen now to ensure stronger oversight with this?
Well, indeed, one of the reasons that we know that there are a number of differences between member states when it comes to the enforcement of our privacy rights is indeed that we watch this very closely, and we work very closely both with the European Data Protection Board and national authorities in order for best practices to be shared as fast as possible, and for the sort of the real life effects of having rights when it comes to privacy, for them to be more and more the same all over the Union. And since this was new when it was implemented, I think, almost to the date 2 years ago, we still have work to do in the implementation phase. And for everyone working in legislation, the co-legislator, for us in the Commission, of course, it's a really valuable reminder that we should make sure that the legislation that we proposed eventually pass in Parliament and Council, that it is enforceable, that it can be made real life on ground, that we do not, to get the finest of all compromises, that we make things so tricky that it becomes really difficult to make it work in real life.
And that, of course, is necessary for the development of artificial intelligence. And just a few weeks ago, we covered it here on Euronews. You put on the table your proposal for a European-wide artificial intelligence regulation. I believe it was 3 years in the making. Now, they have been widely welcomed, but some have criticised that they're vague in some areas and they could contain some loopholes. So what would you say to them?
It's a really important discussion. What are the definitions in a legal proposal, so that us who tables it and those who passes it have the same understanding, and those who uses it, they can see that it makes sense, so that if ever challenged by court, the court has good line of reasoning, and we do not get some surprises down the road. We have made quite an effort to make a future-proof definition of what is artificial intelligence, because it's a group of technologies, and when we are focusing on the use cases here, what we are saying is, for instance, is when it's used for predicting, assisting in decision making, finding patterns, so that instead of focusing on the exact technology, then focusing on what is it that it can actually achieve. The second thing is that it is obviously a very important discussion. What is, for instance, subliminal effects? Because we want to make that forbidden, that subliminal techniques are being used to make someone do something that is damaging to themselves or others. And in the process of negotiating the legislation, of course, I hope that we can come closer and closer to common understanding of what will this mean. But this is exactly the point of the work the next month ahead of us. It is to get a common understanding of what is by some considered to be vague or difficult to understand.
And remind our viewers what benefits these kind of data-centric societies and the development of artificial intelligence could bring to their daily lives.
Well, I am really enthusiastic about this. I have seen, for instance, in when it comes to doing a cancer diagnosis, you can use artificial intelligence to help your doctor get a much more nuanced reading of all the many tests that can be done on your blood, so that you get a better diagnosis and you get it faster, so that treatment, if that is needed, can get started. It can be predicting how water will flow, so that you can easily protect yourself against the effects of climate change. It can be how to use fertilizer or pesticides in agriculture, depending on the quality of the soil, the weather conditions. Artificial intelligence can help the farmer to minimize the use of fertilizer, minimize the use of pesticides. Of course, the very trivial examples that we get a recommendation for the next movie that we might like to see, or the next music that we might like to hear. So from the very important life or death, helping out to get a diagnosis fast and good, to something that we use in everyday life, and basically everything in between. Artificial intelligence is here already, and I think it will spread to almost everything we do.
And I just want to ask you, you mentioned it earlier, a little bit more about the European health data space, because obviously health is on our minds this year with the pandemic. And of course, last year, we all just want to be healthy. So I want to hear more about these plans for the European health data space. When could this really become a reality?
Well, I think it will take still a bit of time, because in the health data space, we are to be very specific, because health data is also the most it's really personal. So it's really important that we get this right to create the trust that people's health data can be in a health data space. And in particular, since we know that the majority of Europeans actually say, no, we're not interested in sharing our health data for no matter what purpose. And that, of course, is something that we'll have to work on, to find ways for people to trust that the way that it is set up is secure, so that we can use this data to find better cures, better to predict what would be the long-term effect if, for instance, COVID is treated in one way instead of another way, so that we can engage to improve our health system. So we are very careful working internally, everyone who knows about this, so there will still be some months before we can launch it.
Okay, and I suppose just one final question. What do you want your legacy to be when it comes to this battle for global data, when it comes to regulation and policy? What do you want to see actually set in stone before you leave office?
Oh, I still have, give or take, 3.5 years to go. So I think I should focus on the job at hand and not so much on whatever legacy. But the job at hand is to give citizen confidence that the markets actually serves them, that technology actually serves them as humans, because that is the point of a democracy, that the integrity and the dignity of each and every one of us, that is the starting point. And that is what I think about basically every day when I get up in the morning, because I think that is the core of our society, and technology should know that, and the market should know that we are not just the raw material or the products. It is for the humans to be at the center of both market and technology.
Okay. Thank you so, so much, Executive Vice President Margrethe Vestager, for your time. And thank you so much for watching. I would now like to head back to Florence and introduce Martina. She's an EUI Max Weber Research Fellow of Law, and she's going to put a question to the Executive Vice President, Commissioner Vestager.
Good morning, Commissioner. I wanted to ask you a question about startups. We have heard now in your discussion that cross-border data flows are the lifeblood of the digital economy, and the EU model, when it comes to transfers of personal data, applies conditions at the border. And this model of conditional flow is seen as an example all over the world and has been followed by other countries, especially developing countries. However, research also conducted here at the UI shows that these conditions applied at the border can create costs for businesses and can restrict trading services. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think about the impact of these conditions on companies to develop, and especially on startups? Thank you.
I think this is your question is a very good illustration of a trade-off here. That when we create a set of ways of doing things that can create trust, it comes with a cost. And I definitely think that it's worth it, because if we do not build trust in what we do with data, I think we will see a major backlash. Already now, the majority of Europeans are very reluctant to want to share data. I think for many reasons. One of them could be that we have not been very generous with enabling people to get digital skills, both at the basic level but also high level. So I think it's it is really important, and we try to figure out how, of course, to make the costs as small as possible. One of the things that has been looked into by the European Data Protection Board is indeed the cost for small and medium-sized businesses. And one of the things that they will work on all over Europe is to see how can we facilitate that the cost for small and medium-sized businesses, that they become smaller. And I think it's really important, and of course, I think it is doable with financial tools, with practical guidance, maybe also with digital tools, so that we also get a market response in how to handle data that will minimize costs.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Okay, so thanks a lot. And now we have Philip Hanspach. Philip is a PhD researcher in economics at the Department of Economics at the Institute.
Good morning, Commissioner Vestager. Following up on the previous question, how can EU data regulation not only avoid harm, but also confer competitive advantage to European firms, for example, through data quality or by leveraging cultural and linguistic diversity?
Well, thank you very much. I think it's crucial focusing on data quality, and also to see how who we are is a strength rather than an issue or a problem. And one of the things that we insist upon in the proposed legislation for artificial intelligence is that if there is a use case of artificial intelligence where there is a risk of undermining fundamental values, well, we have quite strict demands on the data quality used to develop the artificial intelligence. And that can have, I think, two positive effects. One, that there is an awareness that one should create high quality data. So when data sets are being built, when data are being harvested, that it is done in a way so that it is high quality data. And the second thing, that having high quality data, you can also make high quality applications. We have already seen some of the first really sad examples of, for instance, artificial intelligence supporting social workers in their work, that there is a risk of bias. If we, because of having high quality data and having demands on those who innovate to produce artificial intelligence, that they do away with that kind of risk of biases, you get a really excellent product. And you, I think, also open the public demand for artificial intelligence to support decision making, to make that market much, much stronger. Because I think a lot of public authorities, they would scare away if they cannot take it as a given that the use case will be risk-free when it comes to discrimination because of gender, religion, your postal code, that sort of things. So there is a relationship between high quality products and applications and the quality of data. And asking for qualitative, high quality data, you also, I think, change the perception as to how to harvest it, how to organize it. Last but not least, I think the fact that we speak many languages, that we have many different cultures here, political cultures when it comes to, basically everything we do, there is a richness in the data that will be created and are being created in the Union that can be very useful. Because when data are diverse, when they have these qualities, well, then the probability that you will get a good application from it is also much higher.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. This interaction between data, quality of data, the use of data with artificial intelligence is it's very interesting and very important. Thanks a lot. So last but not least, we're going to have Francisco Duarte. Francisco is a PhD researcher in law at the Department of Law of the European University Institute.
Good morning, Commissioner, and thanks a lot for a really excellent discussion. We know that digital sovereignty is very dependent on the role of specific digital actors, the so-called digital champions. And we also know that Europe has struggled for many years to foster the creation of such digital champions with unfortunate consequences for our digital sovereignty. So I would love to hear your opinion on should we create or foster the creation of such digital champions in Europe, even beyond the more reactive policies like competition law? Thank you very much.
I think we have learned an important lesson from the first big chapter of digitization, because there's no European social media company, there's no big European search engine. And one of the reasons from that comes from the fact that we never enabled a real European digital single market. Neither have we provided for a capital market that comes with the quality of capital to scale up businesses. It was still so, yes, a couple of years ago, that it would be an obvious thing to go to the bank and create a debt instead of taking new investors on board. And of course, those are things that we have been working really hard to correct. To have a digital single market, to have a capital market where you can take investors on board, and they also comes with the competences that enables you to scale your company. So now when we enter a chapter of sort of industrial digitization, I think we have a lot of promising assets for us to see that this digitization will produce also big European players. That, of course, will only happen if we want to use the technology, if we want to produce the data that can be used. That can be for mobility. Self-driving cars could be one of them, can be in greening our economies, can indeed be in e-government, that public services are being delivered in a digital way. We have a traditionally huge public services in Europe, and that could be used as an asset to be part of also a demand-driven development of high quality applications that can be trusted, and because of that, also really important businesses to deliver these different applications. And at the same time, we are building sort of practical, really hands-on capacity in Europe. The high-performance computers would be a very good example. We just inaugurated the Vega computer, and over the pandemic, it has been very useful with the assets in Bologna. To map the virus and to test what molecules can actually have a hope to prevent or to cure the disease if you have got it. So we see that with some of these common assets that are really useful and that no individual business would be able to provide for themselves, then we create real fertile ground for a much stronger sense of digital sovereignty. So it comes with the data proposals, the capabilities, the demand drive coming from different sectors, and that very strong industrial culture and that sense of entrepreneurship that is indeed European. In the Recovery and Resilience Funds, 20% of that fund is earmarked for digital investment. So every member state will use 20% of their allocation from the Recovery and Resilience Funds for digital. That can be digital infrastructure, but that can also be digital skills. And that indeed is key, because everything I have spoken about so far to enable that European embrace of this industrial digitization, of course, people need to have skills. So we need to have at least 70% of the European population by 2025 to have basic skills, and we will need at least 20 million of ICT specialists in the broader sense of that word by 2030, and a better gender balance as well in this community. So it's really hands-on. It is starting now. It is quite well financed. So I think we have a lot going for ourselves if, of course, we get action on ground for things to change.
Well, thank you so much, Commissioner. This was really a great answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thanks a lot. We are coming at an end, and that was fantastic. We have learned a lot. So really, thank you so much to our speaker, the Executive Vice President and Commissioner, Margrethe Vestager. Thank you for this enlightening speech. And I would also say thank you for reminding us that the European project is grounded on deep values. And to follow these values, at some point we have to make fundamental choices as well. And we have to be prepared for that. But I see we are in very good hands, and we wish you really the best of the successes with your very ambitious agenda. Thanks a lot again from Florence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this very warm ending. It has been a pleasure to be with you this morning. I hope the rest of this important conference will indeed be really, really successful. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.